Does a series ever hack your brain? You know the feeling. You watch or read or maybe play a story that you can admit faults to. The characters are kinda weird, the plot is very convenient at times, and oh boy, the humor. And yet it just gets you? For some reason that you may or may not understand, this piece of art has a direct highway to your innermost essence, some bizarre, almost ephemeral connection that causes every piece of the work's DNA to reverberate through you stronger than anything else. Naruto is a series about a blonde kid who just cannot be bothered with school. He wants to be the president. The hallmark shonen manga by Masashi Kishimoto hardly needs any introduction, and while it does eventually complicate itself with a great power system, an absolute immaculate gallery of villains, and way too much focus on Sasuke, the story remains fundamentally about an outcast kid, fighting to become a respected and beloved authority to those around him. My love for the series also needs very little introduction, as I am now internationally known as the Naruto boyfriend. Thank you, Kotaku. And as you have certainly surmised, Naruto is to me the exact kind of series described in the intro bit. I have fallen in and out of love with the series numerous times within my life, but no matter what new thing I find to nitpick or what surprising aspect endears itself to me, one constant is that at any given point in my life, I am probably thinking about Naruto in one capacity or another. The reasons for that are obviously personal and subjective, but I think that there are a few key elements of Naruto that make it very capable of entrancing you the way it did for me. Somehow, perhaps because of the things we will discuss, Naruto often finds itself becoming a home for new and returning fans of the medium alike. And thus, it remains something that I keep coming back to. I don't think it's particularly controversial to say that Naruto is a long series. In terms of actual episodes and chapters, yes, but also in terms of time. The original manga ran for 15 years, with the anime following suit. When we are talking about a work that covered such vast amounts of time in which it was a continuous contemporary presence, we can start talking about maturative fiction, works that by their sheer length force their current audience to either abandon it over time or to turn it into a persistent companion of their life for years. In cases of the latter, the series opens itself up to truly getting to you through exposure alone, if it plays its cards right. In Naruto's case, the first of its cards is its basic premise. Before the series ever expanded into pretend politics and mysticism, it had a core setup as bumfuck simple as it was engaging. This kid is a fucking loser, and everybody hates him, and he wants to prove them wrong. The Nine Tails, the ninja world, and all that other stuff are initially really just window dressing, a backdrop for what is basically a social power fantasy, the series promising that you will see this twerp go from a misunderstood outcast to a central figure of his community. So far, so underdog. While it is a common and somewhat tired trope by now, it's hard to overstate the immense power adolescent underdog narratives can have over children and young teens. When you're a kid, the world is a weird and scary place, full of rules and traditions that often make no sense to you. And, more importantly, many cultures and communities make it a veritable sport to patronize you for not understanding them, something that keeps up well into your teens. Under these circumstances, it isn't surprising that kids and young teens show a tendency towards seeing themselves as the underdog, as someone who gets singled out and who has to navigate a confusing web of expectations, prejudices, and boundaries. And it can often feel like there's no winning. At least, that's how I felt. Or rather, how I rationalized the memories of my kid self through the lens of an ever-deteriorating adult brain. I remember never feeling like I quite fit in, social cues felt random and unpredictable, and it made social life feel hostile and difficult. This is not to say that I was hashtag different and hashtag unique. I think I just had some undiagnosed social condition or whatever. Either way, it often really did feel like everyone was in on some magic social trick I had missed out on. Like I was the only one who didn't get how to function as part of the group, and yeah, that I was being punished for it. It's at this stage of my life, and of the lives of all kids that might have felt similarly, that I was first exposed to Naruto. And what an exposure it is. While it dwells on the melodrama of being the outcast quite a bit, it is fundamentally about pushing back against the status. For all the sad swing flashbacks, Naruto never misses an opportunity to reassure himself and us that he's going to make it, that he will be Hokage, that he will be respected. The series is almost obnoxiously loud about this optimism, and while as an adult it's really easy to just look back and see these outbursts as childish and overly naive, to a kid, this stuff is crack. Seeing a fellow child be confident and struggle through hardship despite not being considered conventionally accepted is a powerful image. It helps that Naruto's path and his solutions to problems are, well, fairly simple. Bonk someone harder than they thought possible, dig your heels in, and most importantly, never give up. Whatever happens, stand your ground and move forward. These simplistic attitudes are powerful enough to feel motivating and grand, but not complex enough to trigger the miasma of disorientation that so easily overcomes your kid's self when dealing with the adult world. This feels even grander because of the duplicitous nature of Naruto's plight. Explicitly, he is an outcast due to the Nine Tails, but in practice, most of the social pain he suffers come from people who either don't know about that or voice their dislike directly towards the child, not the demon. So despite the narrative explanation, it often feels that Naruto is isolated not because of the Nine Tails, but simply because he's weird and loud. His sense of humor is a little crass, he can't sit still and gets excited way too quickly. A profile that many children will at least partially recognize in themselves. Because of this reframing of Naruto's situation, him nonetheless showing how resourceful, ambitious, and capable he is feels electrifying, like even the greatest dork can rise up to the occasion and succeed. I believe this is the first crucial ingredient to how Naruto became so formative. But of course, a lot of this only really works when you're a kid. Maturing means realizing that the world is complicated, beyond what you could have ever imagined, and so these simple ideals lose much of their power. And the audience is forced into this because, well, that's how aging works. But this is where Naruto uses its length in the best way it could. It grows up alongside the audience. This isn't at all unique to Naruto, but I do think Naruto does it in a pretty clever way. The conflicts with the first part of the series gradually start becoming more and more complicated, culminating in something that, in childhood, is kind of impossible to reconcile: Sasuke's betrayal. Suddenly, the paradigms of the good guys and the bad guys are shaken considerably. Betrayal is at this point nothing new to the series, but it's the first and only time it happens with a character this major and, more importantly, with a character whose opinion of Naruto felt like a big part of the stakes. Sasuke, early on, serves as almost a barometer for how much Naruto is succeeding at winning over his community. The icy, untouchably cool rival is the guy we want to see acknowledge our boy Naruto, both because he is his direct opposition, but also because Sasuke, in no uncertain terms, represents the society which would reject Naruto. He is popular, so popular and socially endowed in fact, that he gets to just ignore and scoff at all the people that love and adore him, a privilege Naruto could only dream of. Of course, Sasuke has his own baggage to deal with, but from the focalized perspective, Naruto's that is, he is the ultimate wall to be overcome, the symbolic checkmark that will make his achievement feel legitimate. So to lose him to Orochimaru and thus have him removed from the equation immediately upsets this dynamic, revealing the world of Naruto to not conform to his simplistic thinking and structure after all. After this point, the series complicates itself at an insane pace. We switch out the vague, mustache-twirling villainy of Orochimaru for the sinister, terror-oriented Akatsuki, which themselves open up discussions about international relations, the ninja system itself, and the state of the world. Naruto matures by becoming more complex, more aggressively confrontative of Naruto's beliefs, and, yes, increasingly political. The start of Naruto is by no means devoid of politics. We literally start the series with a discourse of privatized military after all. But it's in part 2 where it really gets going. The relationship between villages and the history of the ninja world become increasingly more prominent, until they crescendo into the Pain arc, where Naruto faces an enemy that, by all intents and purposes, has a very justifiable grudge against the village we have come to see as the home of the good guys. The heads of the village are reframed from benevolent leaders to lifelong war criminals, some more than others, of course. This is, similar to Sasuke, an unresolvable conflict within the simplicity the series superficially clads itself in. And this, too, is something that audiences that had been following the series and been growing up alongside it could and would probably have related to. The tail end of your teenage years are often a time when you have to face the fact that the world isn't black and white at all. Institutions, organizations, and even people you previously just assumed were always in the right suddenly show themselves to be, well, full of contradictions, good and bad, and everything in between. A big one for me was the country I live in, Switzerland. Like any conservative Western country, it makes sure to dress up in an air of national superiority, highlighting prosperity and wealth as indicators of just how good of a country it is, and just how proud you should be of it. As a teen living here, learning history only through the channels that were available to me at the time, I just kind of believed this stuff wholeheartedly. It's what I was told after all. But the instant I started looking beyond the facade, became aware of the history and the various economic and social injustices of the place I live in, pretty much all of that confidence began unraveling. It's weird, losing faith in something you took for granted for much of your childhood, but at the same time, it's your responsibility as an adult to navigate this web of conflicts and form a good stance on it, especially in the post-colonial West. And yeah, I realize that saying, "this anime helped me cope with the realization that I have to deal with the weight of political history," is an insanely unhinged statement. But at the same time, yeah, it kinda did help with that. Seeing this conflict be represented in a series that I had, at that point, been watching for literal years felt reassuring. Like I wasn't alone in these confusing realizations, and that this phase was necessary in order to move forward and in order to grow up. And it is in how Naruto chooses to move forward in the face of this conflict that the series does something very sweet. While it acknowledges the complexity of adult life and the mire of social and political discourse, it nonetheless allows Naruto to do what he does best: stand his ground and never give up. The scene in which he talks to Nagato lays it out perfectly. Yes, naive tenacity may by itself not be able to solve any real issues in the adult world, but what it can do is push you forward, empower you until you find the actual solutions. Never giving up won't save the world, but it will allow Naruto, and you, to continue onwards. By remaining confident and tenacious about one's self-worth, one puts oneself into the right position to tackle these issues head-on. It would have been easy to just look at the world and succumb to desperate nihilism, to just refuse to engage with it, or to depict the world as hopelessly confusing and grey. Instead, Naruto internalizes the issue and puts the focus not on the specific solutions regarding war and suffering, but on the attitude and belief system necessary to even begin looking for said solutions productively. Maybe he doesn't know how to fix the world now, but the only way he will ever figure it out is if he continues to believe in himself and face the world earnestly, taking in the good and the bad and not letting it stop him from his path. And I just think that this is a very productive way of handling this in a kids show, because yeah, you won't be able to reconcile the various contradictions and conflicts of the world within your mind when you're a teen. You might not even be able to do that when you're an adult. So the next best thing is to focus on keeping yourself moving, on building your confidence and character to a point where you can face the world and worry about the issues at hand without doubting yourself. Naruto starts simple, and when faced with complexity, it breaks that complexity back down and essentially allows itself to empower people in a way that will allow them to face that complexity without sacrificing its own simplicity. This duality between the depicted complexity of the world and the still simple but productive messaging around it is why Naruto became so formative. The third and final ingredient is something that I bet you didn't expect me to say after all of this praise. It's that Naruto is far from perfect. After my recent rewatch, I will give it a 10 out of 10, no hesitation. But the series is, like everything, flawed. The most prescient flaw for the context of this video is, of course, the ending. The political conflicts and the horror of the ninja system essentially vanish from the storytelling right at the end and are never really directly addressed. The closest we get to it is Sasuke's speech when leaving the village, but that basically amounts to a limp, "Oh haha, I guess we'll see what we can do." I know I said that the pain arc is more so about Naruto's internal attitude rather than constructing any external changes and solutions, but at the same time, you kind of cannot discuss a world of child soldiers in excruciating detail for 1.5 decades, only for it to just never be mentioned at the conclusion. Sasuke's speech only serves to highlight this bizarre thematic absence. This counts doubly for a series where the protagonist's goal is specifically tied to a position of political power, that is to say, a position in which they would have the influence necessary to bring about real change. And this is another thing the ending fails to deliver on. Naruto becoming Hokage is never shown, and him being Hokage is only shown within the timeline of Boruto, where we meet an adult Naruto who isn't really a political figure and is more just a gag about how fucking tired he is of being Hokage. Speaking of gags, the actual Hokage ceremony, the moment the series had been building on for its entire runtime, is also not shown in the main series, being relegated to a special gag chapter that turns the whole thing into an exceptionally unfunny joke. In one fell swoop, the ending falls flat of both the core initial premise of Naruto's ninja way and the more complex world conflict set up by Pain. Perhaps you could argue that actually this is intentional, that this ending is meant to further highlight the insurmountability of the world's problems. While I think that's an admirable effort, in order for that reading to be believable, I think the ending would have to reflect that intention at least in tone, which it doesn't. This is presented as an unambiguously happy ending in both manga and anime. If this really were a sort of we don't know where this is going kind of deal, I don't believe it would be this obviously good and happy. So no, unfortunately I don't believe that this was all actually a very clever subversion. And I have just zoomed in on one portion of Naruto. With a series this long, there are plenty of issues you can find to criticize. The Tenchi Bridge arc is kinda bad. The war arc, even though I've warmed up on it, is just too long and cluttered. Sasuke's character progression ranges from really great to borderline nonsense, etc, etc, etc. But this is where I open door number 2 and repeat what I said earlier. This flawed nature is part of why Naruto remains so magnetic as a series, at least to me. While it may fumble some of its thematic weight at the end, I think this fumbling is exactly why I find myself coming back to the series so often. Eventually, you finish Naruto, and eventually, you grow up. When both of these happen, the series' legacy is the only way in which it can continue to influence you. If I loved Naruto 100%, with no issues or reservations regarding the ending or anything else, I think I would only really return to the series to praise it and just to watch my favorite bits again. But because the series is flawed, it gets into my head, forces me to think about what I like and dislike and why. And ironically, because a lot of Naruto's issues, in my opinion, stem from its lackluster conclusion regarding its more serious adult conflicts, it has and continues to force me to investigate my feelings about those conflicts. Does this kids' cartoon even have a responsibility to resolve these threads? Who else would hold that responsibility? Is the ending even bad? Why is it bad? What would have been a better conclusion to the theme of peace and war? What solutions are even feasible, both in fiction and in the real world? After the series spent over a decade building up this idea of confidence and tenacity, this drive to stand your ground and to find your own answers within your self-worth as your base, it in the end left me with, well, a void. A gaping nothing where there should have been some conclusive statement. But exactly because of that, it has forced me to actually apply what the series was trying to impart on me. Because the ending and because much of Naruto left me with a desire for more or desire for something else, it catalyzed me into actually thinking about these things on a grander level. Of course, a good series will generally also make you think about things. But the way Naruto's ending and Naruto's flaws have kept me coming back just to reconsider and rethink about if it's actually bad, if it's actually solvable, is something that no other series has ever done for me, or honestly will ever do for me again. And considering how many people keep coming back to Naruto and keep discussing these exact things, it feels like I'm not alone in this. So, I have no idea if any of this was at all relatable to anyone. Maybe this video is just the incoherent ramblings of someone who still doesn't get it. But I have lived with this thought in my head for years now. For some reason, I keep returning to Naruto. I keep thinking about it. The series has been done and over for almost 10 years now, and I don't give a shit about Boruto. Yet somehow I cannot ever completely abandon it. And I think it's because of what the series did for me. Naruto is, beyond all the more refined and theoretical themes, about teaching you that while you may be surrounded by confusion and hostility, while you may feel alone and isolated, while you may not be able to influence or understand what's around you, you can influence and understand what's inside of you. The world is made up of an infinite number of puzzle pieces, most of which you just cannot control, except the most important puzzle piece of them all, yourself. No matter what the future may hold, as long as you can believe in yourself and your own inherent worth as a person, you can persevere and tackle life one day, one puzzle piece at a time. Even if, at the end, I feel like the series didn't quite deliver, it left me with an immensely valuable lesson, one that I learned through practice, through forced practice, to focus on what I can control, on what I can fix. To believe in myself and to allow that belief to guide my actions in this weird and wacky universe. And I think that because of that, Naruto is a series that has stuck with me. It's why it is, in a cringe but real way, a figurative home to me. A place to return to. Thank you all so much for watching. This was again something a little different and hopefully, interesting. Quick reminder, if you want to pledge to my Patreon, you will be able to watch all videos a couple of days early. So if you're one of those people who is just eagerly waiting for my next video, first of all, thank you very much. And second of all, consider that. Speaking of Patreon, a huge thank you to all of my patrons, without whom these videos just wouldn't be possible. A special thank you to Fiction Ape, Mr. Game, Cini, Courage, Alex, Iron Camel, Jameson Tate, Ludenther, Paracha, Peroscoco, Project Iceman, That's Just Ash, Mr. Meander, and Geo. Thank you all so much again, and I will see you next time. Take care and be safe. Goodbye.